Welcome back. Excel can do a lot of helpful statistics for us, and we're going to go over some tips that might be helpful in section 2.1 and also on the project. First, we need to tell Excel we want to do statistics. We have to turn on what's called an add-on. We only have to do this once and it'll be good for the whole term. And to turn it on, we have to go to File, down to Options, select Add-ins, then select the Analysis Toolpack. Then we click the Go button. To turn on the Analysis Toolpack, we just have to click the checkbox on the Analysis Toolpack and click OK. To know if it worked, click the Data tab on the ribbon, and you should see Data Analysis now on the far right of your ribbon. We'll use that in just a little bit. All right, now let's look at how we can use Excel to make frequency distributions, find midpoints, relative frequencies, cumulative frequencies, make histograms, and also make frequency polygons. What I have here are 20 data values from a 50-point exam. We're going to first make a frequency distribution with 6 classes. First thing we need to know is the class width. To find the class width, we first have to identify the minimum data value and the maximum data value. I always make sure when I'm working in Excel to label my cells so I know what my numbers are when I have Excel calculate them. So next to minimum, to find the minimum, I'm going to hit equals, MIN for minimum, open a parentheses, and then I can click and drag and select all my data values. When I hit enter, Excel will automatically find the minimum data value of 5. Similarly, I can find the maximum by hitting equals, max, open a parentheses, and select all my data values. When I hit enter, I now have my maximum value of 50. We're ready to find the class width. To find the class width, we take the maximum minus the minimum and divide by the number of classes we want, which was 6. Excel can do this for us. Any calculation first by hitting equals, open a parentheses, and let's just select the number itself. Select maximum, subtract the minimum, close the parentheses. Those parentheses are important to preserve order of operations. Use the slash for divide, and we want 6 classes. Hit enter, and the width is 7.5. Okay, we have to round that up to the nearest whole number, so the width is actually going to be 8. We're ready to make our frequency distribution. The way I recommend doing it on Excel is to have the low value in one column, the high value in another column, and then the frequency in a third column. The low value should start with the minimum value. We know that's to be 5. Then I'm going to have Excel do the rest of the work by hitting equals, clicking the cell above it, and adding the class width of 8. Then hit enter. Then I'm going to go back and highlight that cell, because when I highlight that cell, the bottom right of that corner has a dot. That dot is so that I can click and drag and copy that formula down. We want a total of 6 cells going down. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 cells. Good. For my high values, the first high value is going to be 1 less than the next low number. So less than 13 is 12. And then I know I'm going to count up by 8. So equals, click the cell above it, plus 8. Enter. Highlight the cell, grab that dot and drag down. now we have our ranges for each class. Now it's time for Excel to tell us the frequencies for each class. This is where we click Data on the ribbon, and then Data Analysis. When the Data Analysis box pops up, we want to find the histogram option. Select histogram and click OK. It's going to ask us for a lot of information. A key button that I want to notice is this button on the right that allows me to select the cells that I want to use for my histogram or my frequency distribution. So first it says Input Range. We're going to select the cells that have all my data, the actual numbers in them. Click the button to the right, select the values, and then we push the button again and it goes back to the menu. Bin range are the top numbers for each class. Click the button and select the top numbers for each class that we just found. For the output options, I like to select Output Range and then push the button and just pick an empty cell somewhere in my distribution that's kind of out of the way. So let's just put it in G1. I'm going to also ask for a chart output because it's going to give me the histogram at the same time it finds the frequencies. Nice shortcut. Click OK, and there we go. Highlighted now I have each bin and its frequencies. I'm going to copy it into my chart down here. 5 to 12 had 2, then 3, 3, 8, 3, 1. Those are my frequencies. Now what you might notice about my histogram is it has a few problems with it. The first problem is there's a gap between each bar. But all I have to do is double click a bar, and this Format Data Series will show up on the right, and I can grab that gap width and drop it down to 0%. When the gap width is down to 0%, you'll notice the bars are now matching each other. Now any good chart has a title and labels for each axis. You probably don't need a key, so I can delete the key by selecting it. Histogram's bad title. I said these were exam scores, right? Now bin, that's another bad label. Let's call it the score range. Frequency is an appropriate label on a histogram, so we can leave that because the vertical axis on a histogram is always the frequencies. All right, we have a histogram and we have a frequency distribution. Let's say we want a little bit more information. Let's say we also want the midpoints. The midpoint is the average of the low and the high value. We just have to add them together and divide by 2. Excel can do all the work for us by hitting equals, opening a parentheses, click the low, plus, clicking the high, and closing the parentheses. That way order of operations is preserved, and dividing by 2. 8.5 is my first midpoint. I can click that corner and drag it down, and it's going to find the midpoint of every single class. Let's say I want the relative frequency. The relative frequency, we take the frequency and divide by the number of values in my data set. Again, Excel can do the work. Hit equals, select the frequency for this row, and divide by, we know there are 20 data values, and hit enter. Highlight it and grab that dot, drag it down, and now I have the relative frequency for each class. What if I want the cumulative frequency? The cumulative frequency takes a look at how many have occurred at this point or lower. So the first row, there's just 2 data values between 5 and 12. But for the second row, we're going to hit equals and say take the previous number plus, and then we'll take the frequency for the new row enter. Now I can grab that bottom dot and drag it down, and you can see the cumulative frequencies increase all the way up to 20. I want to do one last thing in this Excel video, and that is to make a frequency polygon. Now, the most common error in a frequency polygon is students do not make the polygon touch the x-axis both below and above the data values. This has to happen, and the way we do that is we add an extra row above and below in our data set. Let's make a new data set in our open space to the right here to do just that. The frequency polygon takes a look at the midpoints of my data values. So my midpoints started at 8.5, and then they went up by 8 because that's the class width. So I'm going to say equals the 8.5 plus 8, enter. And there were 6 classes. Click and drag to get my 6 midpoints. Putting the frequencies of 2, 3, 3, 8, 3, and 1. Then we need another row above and another row below to make our polygon. Since the class width is 8, we can say equals, click the one below it, and subtract 8 to back up 8. We're going to put 0 in that spot. Similarly, we can take that plus 8 down one more row and say there's 0 in that row. Now we have the values for our polygon. Select those values and then click Insert on the ribbon. There are lots of charts to do. The line graph is tempting because it looks like what we want, but that will not give us the graph we want. You actually want the scatter plot. That gives you the bimodal data, the x's and the y's. I'm sorry, the bivariate data, the x's and y's. And then one of those scatter plot options are connected dots. Click the connected dots, and there, I'm going to shrink it down. There is our frequency polygon. Now, just like any graph, it needs titles and labels. So let's give it a title. Scroll a bit so you can see what I'm doing. We're going to call this exam scores again. It needs a label on the x-axis and the y-axis. They're not on there by default, but if we click the little plus, we can add axes titles by checking that box. And now on the axes title, we can say that's the frequency. On the x-axis, we can call that the score. And now we have titles. We see the graph touches the x-axis both above and below the data. Our graph is ready to go. So these tips will be helpful as you're working on some of the problems in 2.1 in MyStatsLab. For all of the problems that have data in MyStatsLab, generally you can download the values straight to Excel and start working the problems in Excel. I want to encourage you to get in the habit of doing that, because as the problems become more complex, the tools in Excel will make them much more simpler. So if we can get comfortable using Excel now, it will pay off at the end of the term. Hopefully this helped gave you some tips for 2.1 in the project. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to ask.